On October 30th, 1759, the inhabitants of the Middle East were jolted awake by an earthquake. Cracks appeared in the walls of their homes, roofs began to crumble. People ran out of their homes and gathered in open areas. But because of strong shocks, they kept losing their footing and falling. A month later, there was another earthquake, but it turned out to be even stronger. Trees broke, houses collapsed, deep cracks appeared in the ground. The disaster lasted for 2 minutes. Oases, roads, and cities were destroyed. Incredibly, Baalbek's ancient buildings withstood earthquakes. Some historians state that this majestic and mysterious place was built during the Roman Empire, but many researchers disagree. Whatever the truth is, the city is one of the main archaeological phenomena of humankind. The most amazing building of Baalbek is the Temple of Jupiter. The inhabitants of the Roman Empire believed that Jupiter held power over lightning and thunder. The building looked like a platform with 54 columns. A massive roof rested on these columns. Today, you can only see 6 70-foot-high columns. Each of them consists of 3 sections and resembles a pencil. The cores of these pencils were made of lead. This made the columns exceptionally strong. Each of these pieces of stone weighed an incredible 80 tons. That's the weight of 35 Ford Explorer SUVs. Look, this is the largest block in the Great Pyramid of Giza. But compared to the blocks from Baalbek, it doesn't even look that impressive. The foundation under the Temple of Jupiter was preserved. That's how specialists figured out it consisted of about 25 monolithic stones, weighing 450 tons each. It means that the blocks from Baalbek weigh almost 4 times more than the blocks from Egypt. There are 3 more enormous limestone blocks in the foundation. They weigh 800 tons each. This is more than twice the weight of a Boeing 747 plane. Ancient builders must have had a hard time carving such giants from a piece of stone. And after that, they also had to pull them to the construction site and lift them to a significant height. Repeating these logistics would probably turn out to be a nightmare for present-day builders. To do this amount of work, they would need modern equipment. But Baalbek's constructors didn't have trucks, cranes with circular saws, or electricity. How did the builders of the past manage to do this? Scientists have a theory that includes ropes, winches, and lever systems. Naturally, the engineers of the past made all the gadgets from wood. Around 3,000 feet away from the ruins of the temple complex, there's a quarry. Archaeologists suppose that's where the stones for the construction were cut. They found a block of limestone there. It seemed to be too large, even for this incredible place. The monolith got called the Stone of the South. It was 65 feet long and 13 feet wide. The ancient builders didn't have time to completely separate it from its mother rock. A group of scientists from Austria estimated that this piece of limestone weighed more than 1,000 tons. That's like 3 Boeing aircraft or 160 African elephants. There was another surprise awaiting the archaeologists near the Stone of the South. It was the second monolith that weighed more than 1,200 tons. But the ancient builders didn't stop at that. They continued to work. In 2014, in the same quarry, German archaeologists unearthed a block that weighed 1,650 tons. No one has figured out yet why people of the past needed a piece of stone that weighed as much as 125 school buses. It's also unclear how they were going to move this giant and why they didn't finish the job. In any case, this third monolith is the largest processed piece of stone in human history. There are more questions than answers. Some researchers believe that people of the past had high-tech equipment. Others don't think so, but are eager to understand how the builders managed to move those stones. There's a huge number of ancient buildings and artifacts on the planet. Lots of them make researchers scratch their heads. Near the Pyramid of Djoser in Egypt, archaeologists have found a network of tunnels. This place is called Serapeum. It contains 24 sarcophagi weighing from 70 to 100 tons. The giant boxes are carved from a single piece of granite and covered with heavy lids. The sarcophagi are perfectly symmetrical. To the touch, their walls are as smooth as glass. Even with the current level of technology, this is very difficult to do. But the ancient Egyptians managed this feat. The Lycurgus cup is a priceless artifact and example of ancient nanotechnology. It's made of glass that can change its color. If you put a source of light in front of the cup, it turns green. If the light is behind the goblet, it becomes deep red. In this case, the figure of Greek king Lycurgus turns pale purple. Scientists understood how this color change worked only at the end of the 20th century. Through microscopes, they saw nanoparticles of silver, gold, and copper. They had been added to the glass matrix. Thanks to this, you can observe a color change called dichroism. Interestingly, the gold and silver were grounded into a fine dust. It's almost impossible to do this by accident. Most likely, the ancient experts knew for sure what they were doing. Bolivia has a curious place called Puma Punku. It looks as if an ancient giant played there with an enormous construction set. And after the game, they forgot to put the pieces back into the box. But there are no giants, and the huge stone blocks were carved by ancient builders over 1,500 years ago. Some of the rocks weigh 100 tons. The blocks were brought to an altitude of almost 13,000 feet above sea level from the quarry 60 miles away from the construction site. There's no forest in that area. This means the builders couldn't use trees to make wooden rollers. The monument belongs to the Inca civilization. Scientists are sure they didn't know anything about wheels. In 1992, the inhabitants of a Chinese village decided to drain a pond. Their ancestors had been using it to wash clothes and catch fish for hundreds of years. They kept pumping the water out for 17 days. At the bottom of the reservoir, they made an unexpected discovery. The villagers saw an entrance to a cave going down to a depth of 100 feet. The incredible find was named the Longyou Caves. Unknown builders carved out 320,000 square feet of galleries. There are separate rooms, bridges, pools, and columns that support the ceiling. The walls of the cave are covered with strange carved lines and patterns. Scientists haven't found any information about who built the caves and why they did it. The construction technology also remains a mystery. Antonio Stradivari lived in Italy in the 18th century. He created musical instruments. More than 600 of his works have survived to this day. 500 of them are violins. One of the instruments was sold at auction for $16 million. The violins made by this master sound clear and deep. Researchers can't understand why Stradivarius instruments produce such unique sounds. Perhaps it's all about the varnish the master used to cover the violins. The answer may also lie in the wood the instruments are made of. In those days, Europe had a cold climate. Because of this, the wood became denser, and the instruments made of it sounded especially pleasing to the ear. In the Indian city of Delhi, there's a 23-foot-high pole. It weighs 6.5 tons and is made of 98% wrought iron. The 1,600-year-old pillar has no signs of rust or decay. Scientists believe that the monument is so well preserved thanks to the dry weather and the chemical composition of the metal. It might be resistant to corrosion. And still, researchers don't know how the blacksmiths managed to make an iron pillar that's not afraid of rust. It seems like a tough feat, even for modern metallurgists. The Al-Nasla rock is divided into two parts by a perfectly straight slit. Each boulder stands on a small pedestal. Some people believe this is the evidence of ancient laser technology. But geologists think the split happened due to the ground shifting or natural vibrations that occurred under the rock. This process led to the appearance of the crack. It had been deepening for thousands of years, and gradually, the natural monument took the form you can see today.
1,000 years ago, near modern-day St. Louis, Missouri, there was a vibrant, bustling city called Cahokia. It was a Native American city, the largest and most influential one in Mississippian culture. At its peak, around 1050 BCE, Cahokia was home to as many as 30,000 people, making it larger than Paris at the time. But what's interesting is that Cahokia didn't have any big marketplace. Usually trade was the backbone of any big city, yet this one stood out for archaeologists. That's because Cahokia wasn't about commerce. It was about culture, community, and parties. The people who lived there threw massive parties that would last for days. The city's grandest feature was its 50-acre plaza, surrounded by amazing earthen pyramids. This massive space could hold over 10,000 people. Imagine them all gathering there for festivities, dancing, drinking coffees and teas, feasting on deer, and betting on sports. The events were super lively. Cahokians would wear awesome costumes, style their hair in interesting ways, and decorate their bodies with tattoos. Athletes were playing a game called chunky, where they hurled spears at a rolling stone disc, competing to get as close as possible. The roar of the crowd filled the air, and performers showed off their skills. These celebrations were so wild, they left traces in history. After the parties ended, Cahokians cleaned up by tossing leftovers into pits. Archaeologists have uncovered these waste pits, and they were filled with food remains and pottery. One pit alone contained the remains of 2,000 deer, and that's from a single event. They also found traces of yaupon holly, a caffeinated plant that was traded from hundreds of miles away. This just shows how much effort and thought Cahokians put in their celebrations. Would you like to live in a city like this? But aside from all the fun and games, Cahokia was also deeply complex and spiritual. The city was built on a landscape that mixed dry land with swampy patches. Many people believe that this symbolized the connection between the world of the living and the dead. The people of Cahokia saw their city as a bridge between these two realms. They built earthen mounds, both for ceremonies and rituals, and as construction support. These mounds rose from the swampy areas. Meanwhile, people settled in the drier spots. Elevated pathways connected these neighborhoods, creating a physical link between life and death. Isn't it sad that some ancient metropolises that rival modern cities in scale just disappeared? Cahokia's story came to a quiet end around 1350 CE, when the city was abandoned, all due to changes in environments and weather, floods, and other problems. But the influence of Cahokia was so big, it spread to distant places. Some of their traditions, like chunky and yaupon tea, have survived in native communities to this day. Today, Cahokia is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's not the only megacity we lost. About 5,000 years ago, people in the Indus Valley built some of the world's first cities. Mohenjo-Daro was an ancient city in what is now Pakistan. The city was built around 2500 BCE, and back then, it was a thriving hub of the Indus civilization. Sure, it was much smaller than modern cities, but it was quite huge at the time, around 40,000 inhabitants. It looks like the locals were crazily strict and disciplined people. The city's planning and organization were incredible. It was laid out in a grid pattern. Streets and important buildings aligned along the north-south axis, probably to match the movement of the sun and moon. They also built one of the most advanced systems for water and waste management of their time. The city had about 700 wells. Nearly every house had its own. Most homes also had private bathrooms with drainages and even underground sewers. This shows how skilled these people were at staying clean. And with all this discipline, it looks like there were no kings, queens, or even a central government. They could still have some authority, like local elites or elected officials, just not a classic strict monarchy or religion. Instead, people there cared about simplicity and order. They basically managed themselves, having standardized ways of doing things, from the way tools and potteries were made to how they traded. Which is why, unlike many other cities, Mohenjo-Daro didn't have grand palaces, temples, or monuments. Instead, they had public areas known as citadels. People gathered at citadels for rituals, meetings, and storage of grain. And it seems like this way of life worked perfectly. Scientists found some seals and weights, which means the economy was well regulated. Archaeologists found some intricate artifacts like ivory, lapis lazuli, carnelian beads, and gold jewelry. Another famous find is the small bronze statue known as the Dancing Girl, which was discovered in 1926. Mohenjo-Daro wasn't poor at all. And they also pulled off some awesome buildings. Staying clean was clearly way more important to them than displays of wealth or power. So they created the Great Bath, one of the most famous structures in the city. It's a large, watertight pool built with baked bricks, perched on a mound of earth, being almost a religious place, the closest thing they had to a temple. Meanwhile, the city itself was built on a series of mounds. They grew taller over the centuries as people added new houses and structures. Why did the city fail? No one really knows. There's something mysterious about the sculptures archaeologists found. Many of them seemed intentionally broken. This means the city's later inhabitants, maybe invaders or something, destroyed them for some reason. Some scientists think that the Indus River may have shifted course, disrupting agriculture and trade. But there's no evidence of a flood or any big event like this. It just seems like, over time, the entire Indus civilization just gradually faded away. By 1900 BCE, the culture had shifted and didn't leave much behind. Let me tell you now about the ancient city of Kos, which is located where the modern town of Kos now stands in Greece. Imagine arriving by sea, and the first thing that hits you is the sheer grandeur of its agora, this massive public square built with stones in different colors, laid out on terraces that rise above you. It was one of the biggest in the ancient world, and it made a great impression on anyone approaching the city. This place has a rich history, dating back to around 2300 to 2200 BCE. A long time ago, local folk gathered up from different parts of the island to form a new city in the northeast. People have lived there since the Bronze Age, and over time, it became a super important center of culture and trade. And no wonder, since it's right near a natural harbor. The harbor was sheltered by two breakwaters, and people built some of the most important religious sites there, including the sanctuaries of Aphrodite and Hercules. Kos wasn't just beautiful, though. It had some brilliant design. The whole city was laid out in a neat grid, with streets crossing each other at perfect right angles, literally looking almost like a modern city. Thanks to this, moving around was super easy, and the blocks, or insulae, were big enough to fit several large houses. Kos remained largely unchanged until the 6th century CE. Over time, it started gradually shrinking in size, confined within the walls of what is now the Chora neighborhood. Meanwhile, Palmyra was an ancient city built around a beautiful oasis sometime around the 3rd millennium BCE. Originally known as Tadmor, this city flourished as a major stop on the Silk Road, linking the Near East with Asia. It was a thriving center of trade and culture. They had a marketplace, assembly buildings, grand gates. In other words, this place was bustling with life. The city has been through many hands throughout its history, from the Byzantine to Arab caliphates, which is probably why it had some awesome architecture. An interesting blend of Greco-Roman, Persian, and Arabic vibes. The Temple of Bel, the Great Colonnade, and a Roman-style theater. But, like all the others, it decayed over time. Palmyra's importance faded, and by the early 1400s, it had been largely destroyed. But at least its ruins remained. Right now, they're a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
2 centuries ago, a 31-year-old Frenchman stormed into his brother's office in Paris. He had only one thing to share. "I've got it!" The man was so excited that he immediately collapsed. He spent the next 5 days in bed recovering his health. Who was this mysterious person, and why was he so thrilled? Jean-François Champollion made one of the greatest scientific breakthroughs in human history. He had cracked the code of Egyptian hieroglyphs. This enabled scientists to finally unravel the secrets of this ancient civilization. They weren't able to read hieroglyphs for nearly 2,000 years. After the Romans took over Egypt, the intricate writing system slowly faded away from people's minds. The last of the hieroglyphic texts date back to the 4th century. For thousands of years, Egyptians used images to show their lives. But the knowledge of how to read these pictures was lost to modern science. The story of hieroglyphs began in 3250 before current era. That's when ancient Egyptians developed writing. Their motivation was to better organize the distribution and storage of goods. One of the earliest examples is a ceramic jar that had an inscription in black ink. There were two major writing systems. The first were the hieroglyphs, which literally means sacred carving. Egyptians carved hieroglyphs in stone on temples, tombs, and similar monuments for 3,000 years. They present a system of pictorial texts. A pictograph is a picture or a drawing that stands for an idea of a word. It's a precursor to the true writing as we have it today. For example, when Egyptians wanted to write ibis, they would draw a small image of the bird. Hieroglyphs can be found on walls. They were a formal way of writing. The other writing system was hieratic. Egyptians mostly used it when writing on papyrus. That's an early, thicker form of the paper we have today. It soon evolved into demotic. This improved version became the most common writing systems in ancient Egypt. Then, in the early 4th century BCE, Alexander the Great took control of Egypt. This was the time when the Greek Ptolemaic dynasty ruled the country. You've probably heard of the last ruler of this dynasty, Cleopatra. During her time, Egyptian Demotic and Greek were used side by side. The two started mixing, and by the year 100, a new language emerged, Coptic. It slowly replaced the ancient writing system. Only Egyptian priests used hieroglyphs for the next couple of centuries, and then their meaning was lost to history. But not forever. Arabs were the first who tried to solve the mystery of the hieroglyphs. Medieval travelers came across these strange symbols and wanted to understand their meaning. They consulted speakers of Coptic and translated text from Greek and Latin into Arabic to break the code of the hieroglyphs. During the Renaissance, Europeans also became fascinated with the legacy of ancient Egypt. Scholars from the Old Continent believed that hieroglyphs were a group of symbols as opposed to a written language. This was all about to change in 1799. A year earlier, Napoleon, the famous French ruler, arrived in Egypt. His subordinates constructed a fort that dated back to the 15th century. Rashid, or Rosetta, was a port town in the northeast of Egypt, near Alexandria. One section of the old fortification wall contained an interesting slab inside. The stone tablet was made of a granite-like rock. It was just 40 inches high and 30 inches wide. It contained 3 distinctive sections of text carved into it. The letters were in 3 scripts and 2 languages: hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Greek. It was a fragment of a larger ancient stela. These are upright stone slabs that are used to dedicate to a person or an event, but the one from Rosetta was damaged. 2/3 of the hieroglyphic text on the top was missing. The bottom Greek text lacked a cornerstone. The only fully preserved section was the writing in Demotic in the middle of the slab. It eventually ended up in the British Museum. The scientific community was intrigued, and the race was on to decipher it. Prints and casts of the slab went out all over Europe. Scholars already knew ancient Greek, so in theory, this shouldn't have been so hard. The first people who saw the Rosetta Stone thought the process would take 2 weeks. In the end, it took 2 decades. The main issue was the fact that hieroglyphs and spoken ancient Egyptian didn't have a connection anymore. Scientists didn't know what sounds the letters on the slab corresponded to. Imagine if English disappeared 1,000 years in the future. Then someone finds a tablet with the word dog. At first, they wouldn't know how to read the word or the individual letters. Even if they figured out how to pronounce the word, they wouldn't know its meaning. This is what linguists were dealing with in the case of the Rosetta Stone. The careful study of the artifact produced another find. The texts weren't direct translations of each other. They both described the same event, but in different words. It was like you saw a movie with two friends, and then all three of you wrote different reviews about it. The original text was probably in Greek, but the translators added extra words to make it sound more Egyptian. An English physician and physicist, Thomas Young, made the first great breakthrough. He knew that the name Ptolemy appeared several times in the text based on the Greek translation. This wasn't an Egyptian name, so it was impossible to represent it with a single image. The only way to spell out this Greek name was to use symbols that sound like it when produced. This is called transliteration, and we have it today as well. This is how foreign-sounding words are written down in Chinese or some Slavic languages. Young focused on sets of hieroglyphs in oval frames. These are called cartouches. He experimented a bit but finally discovered that one of them read, Ptolemy the Great. The individual hieroglyphs that made up this name corresponded to sounds needed to produce it. This is where our mysterious man from the beginning of the video enters the picture. Champollion picked up where Young left off. He knew Coptic, so the Frenchman was able to determine what many other hieroglyphs sounded like. The eureka moment was close. It came while he was studying a cartouche from a site dedicated to Ramses II. It had 4 symbols. The last 2 were the same. He determined this was the sound S. The first symbol was the sun. This is Ra or Re in Coptic. So the cartouche read Ra something SS. Can you already guess the name? Of course, it's Ramses. This breakthrough finally cracked the code. Ancient Egyptian wasn't a mishmash of cool-looking images. It was a phonetic language that Jean-François Champollion discovered in September of 1822. The stone slab is today known as the Decree of Memphis. The Egyptian Council issued it in this city in the year 196 before current era. In it, they expressed their loyalty to the pharaoh. They erected identical stelae and temples all across Egypt. The Rosetta Stone was just one copy of them, but its content is less important than the fact that Champollion's translation gave these ancient peoples their voice again. During the 1800s, European scholars didn't think that the Egyptian civilization was much older than classical Greek or Roman. Now that scientists could read hieroglyphs, a whole new chapter of human history opened. One of the most famous finds in the history of archaeology happened in 1922. That's when the British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. The whole world admired King Tut's golden mask. But without Champollion's pioneering work, it would be impossible to know who its owner was. The young pharaoh's cartouche is phonetic. For instance, you pronounce the pictograph of a chick as the vowel U. The symbol for the key of life is an ankh, and there is a shepherd's crook in the end. It symbolizes the word ruler.
Listen to this. Neanderthal fiber technology. Nope, I'm not joking. The concept is real. In 2020, a team of scientists published a paper that redefined the way we saw our closest ancestors. A find in France changed archaeology forever, and it wasn't the first time something like this had happened. But let me start from the beginning. Neanderthals. For a long time, they fit the image of the typical cavemen. If you are now thinking of someone like Fred Flintstone, you wouldn't be much wrong. What was the reason behind this stereotype? When did we start believing that Neanderthals were not the brightest tools in the shed of evolution? In comes William King, a 19th century British geologist. He was the man who named the Neanderthals. Based on the bones King found, the scientists declared the species not intelligent, and this image stuck with the Neanderthals for centuries to come. But a piece of string, just a quarter of an inch long, changed everything. A small, dry river valley, Abri du Maras, was the place of the great find. Archaeologists unearthed a cord fragment next to a stone tool. Such twisted fibers could have been used for everything from making clothes to fishing nets. In prehistory, this was some advanced tech, and the Neanderthals seemed to have mastered it. Scientists already knew that these early humans made tar from birch bark, and that they produced shell beads. There's even evidence of Neanderthal art. They were definitely not primitive. The string section and similar finds are changing the way we perceive our ancestors. The world of archaeology is constantly changing. Take the pyramids in Egypt, for example. Turns out, they weren't really built by an army of people who the pharaoh made work until they passed out. Herodotus, the famous Greek historian, was the man who started the confusion. He claimed, in 500 BCE, that 100,000 men took part in the construction of the Great Pyramid in Giza. He made no mention of who they were and why they were building the pyramids. That's how the myth started. Huge stone slabs pulled by humans, driven by a foreman with a whip. But Egyptologists would beg to differ. Those are the scientists who study ancient Egypt's culture. Fairly recently, they uncovered a workers' village that told a different tale. Yes, there was evidence of hard work on the workers' bones, but the construction industry is demanding even today. It took almost 6 years for 12,000 workers to complete the world's tallest building, Burj Khalifa. Back in Egypt, 3 times more workers finished the Great Pyramid in around 2 decades. An impressive feat of ancient engineering, wouldn't you agree? Superiors looked well after the Egyptians who built the pyramids. Their diet was rich in protein. They had medical care and they got paid properly. In fact, they lived better than the non-working population. And they lived with their families near the construction site. Archaeologists know all this because they unearthed bakeries and dormitories with bread jars and other goodies. Looks like the pharaohs were okay employers after all, and the job market wasn't that terrible. They also kept detailed papyrus records of the build and hieroglyphs. You and I wouldn't stand a chance of reading these letters that resemble images. Egyptologists had the same problem. For over a millennium, no one had used this type of font. And it's not like there was an English ancient Egyptian dictionary you could open and find meanings of words. But all this changed in 1822. A couple of decades before, the French found a broken slab of black granite. The stone contained 1 text in 3 scripts: Ancient Greek, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Demotic. The last one was also the Egyptian language, but in a simplified script. Scientists dated it back to 196 BCE. The content is a religious proclamation. A French philologist and Orientalist, Jean-François Champollion, was the first one to crack the code. You see, people haven't forgotten ancient Greek letters. The Frenchman successfully matched the Greek letters with the ones in the Egyptian script. And voila, we were finally able to read hieroglyphs. The name of the piece of granite that made it all possible was the Rosetta Stone. The importance of its discovery went beyond archaeology. The word Rosetta Stone even entered the English dictionary. It represents a discovery that helps people understand an enigma that has been puzzling them for a long time. There are similar games. A symbol is attached to a particular message. Then you have to decode the message by replacing the symbol with a corresponding letter. In a nutshell, this is what scientists did with the Rosetta Stone more than 2 centuries ago. Do you know what is the oldest deciphered language in Europe? It has an unattractive name, Linear B. The script belongs to the Mycenaean Greek language. It predates the ancient Greek alphabet by several centuries. You can easily guess which script it is descended from. Linear A. The people from Crete used Linear B more than 1,000 years ago. During the Late Bronze Age, the Greek civilization that used the script vanished. There was no one who could read Linear B, and more importantly, no one knew it existed in the first place. This was about to change during the first years of the 20th century. A British archaeologist by the name of Sir Arthur Evans excavated a vast palace complex at Knossos, Crete, Greece. This was the center of the Minoan culture that created the enigmatic script. The palace boasted some 1,300 rooms. They had colorful paintings of dolphins, griffins, and bulls. All of these captivated the archaeologists' imagination. But their biggest find was at first overlooked: thousands of slabs of baked clay. The fire that brought down the palace helped preserve the tablets. It was impossible to read the slabs, though. They were written in an unknown language. The scientific community had to wait for another half a century before Michael Ventris cracked the code. He was an English architect and cryptographer. Ventris studied Greek and Latin. While attending the famous Archaeologists lecture, the young man decided to solve the puzzle of Linear B once and for all. He managed to do so in 1952. One of Ventris's most amazing discoveries was that the script was an archaic form of Greek. But cryptology still hasn't solved the code of Linear A. This writing system will remain a mystery until a motivated young person like Michael Ventris comes along. They wouldn't have to be a professional archaeologist. Basil Brown certainly wasn't. Yet in 1939 he discovered the richest early medieval tomb in Europe. This happened in Sutton Hoo in the southeast of England. This wasn't an ordinary tomb made out of stone. It was a full-size ship, 3 times as long as a London double-decker bus. And that's not all. Apart from its main purpose, the ship was full of riches. Deluxe hanging bowls, feasting vessels, gold and dress accessories, and luxurious textiles were just some of the treasures found. Archaeologists were also amazed by the silverware from distant Byzantium. You probably know this city as Istanbul, Turkey. Even in our age, it's several days' drive from Sutton Hoo. Just imagine how much time and money it cost to import a silver plate in the 7th century. That's when the ship went down, according to archaeologists. The English couldn't have done it. At that time, there was no England. The people living in the British Isles at the time were the Anglo-Saxons. Perhaps the ship from the grassy mounds in Suffolk belonged to one of their kings? We will never know. The local acidic soil did away with any possible evidence, or no one laid there in the first place. It could have been a cenotaph, which is a monument constructed to honor an important person. The archaeologists still don't have a definite answer. But what they have found at Sutton Hoo shed light on the Dark Ages. Before the discovery of the ship, they knew little about what had been going on in Britain after the Romans left. Now, the image of the early Anglo-Saxon society was much clearer. Perhaps the English soil will be the site of the next great breakthrough in archaeology.
You're heading to Spain with a team of archaeologists to try to find some ancient artifacts. You get lucky and uncover one of the greatest treasures of the Iberian Bronze Age. Iberian refers to the Bronze Age culture of Portugal and Spain. So you find and unearth coins, jewelry, vases, vessels, and 2 pretty strange items. One is something like a part of a scepter, and the other resembles a bracelet. And you know what's strange about them? They're connected with space. In 1963, several miles away from the city of Villena, Spain, scientists discovered the treasure of Villena, one of the most significant gold hoards from the Bronze Age. Interestingly, are there bronze treasures from the Golden Age? Never mind. All the gold found dates back to sometime between 1500 and 1200 BCE, except for that scepter and bracelet. They were made by inhabitants of another planet, so their production date is unknown. Okay, that's a joke. However, a small part of this joke is true. When scientists studied the found gold, they discovered that those 2 items were made of iron. So what, you might think? Well, the catch is that in the Bronze Age, people didn't mine or manufacture iron. Work with this metal began around 850 BCE, about 400 to 700 years after the creation of the treasure of Villena. How is this possible? A clue to this mystery can be found in ancient Egypt. In the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, an iron dagger was found, which was also made of similar iron. But this dagger was much more valuable than all the others. And that's because it was made from a space object, a meteorite. Yeah, that bracelet and scepter were also made of meteoritic iron. Its difference from Earth metal is that cosmic iron has a high nickel content, so it all makes sense. People from the Bronze Age couldn't mine iron from the deep bowels of our planet, but nothing prevented them from collecting iron falling from the sky. Just imagine how cool it is to have jewelry or a dagger made of material that has traveled millions of years through the vast expanses of space. Perhaps it even contains particles of an ancient extinct star. Today, these two artifacts from the treasure of Villena are the oldest recorded items in the Iberian Peninsula made of meteoritic iron. Now, with everything in its place, you can turn your attention to all the wealth of the treasure of Villena. It contains 66 items: bowls, bracelets, bottles, gold jewelry, 3 silver bottles, and an amber gold button. 22 pounds of ancient gold. People hid it, and only after 3,000 years we were able to discover it. This archaeologist's dream can be found in the Villena Museum, where exhibits from different time periods are presented, from prehistoric times like 50,000 years ago to the present day. Items from the Iberian period, from the Roman period, from the Arab civilization. You can find not only jewelry and coins, but there are also remnants of columns, ceramics, and other architectural artifacts. The collection is considered one of the most important prehistoric treasures of Europe. And the coolest thing is that you can see it all with your own eyes for just €2, which is about $2. Go to Villena, find the museum, and enjoy. Hey buddy, I heard you have a metal detector. Could you help me find a hammer I left somewhere in the field? Your old farmer friend asks. You take a metal detector and go searching, but instead of a hammer, you find hundreds, even thousands of silver coins worth $2 million. You're so happy that the farmer lost that hammer, and now you're rich. Stop! Considering that this land belongs to the farmer, would you tell him about the find or take it with you? In reality, neither of these options happened. In 1992, Eric Laws was helping a farmer search for a lost hammer in a field near Hoxney, Suffolk, England. The metal detector stumbled upon a hidden treasure, a huge one. There were silver spoons, gold jewelry, more than 500 gold coins, and about 14,000 silver ones. Eric Laws accidentally discovered the largest collection of gold and silver from the late Roman period in Britain. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, he and the farmer didn't receive the treasure. It's now in the British Museum. Let's move away from the farmer's field to somewhere on the Mediterranean coast. Imagine you're a scuba diver. There was a strong storm yesterday, but now with the water calm, you dive in and discover the seabed covered with gold dinars. This story happened in 2015. The coins which the storm brought to the shore might have been minted even before the First Crusade that started in 1096. This collection is one of the most impressive archaeological finds in the world. All these treasures surely can make the heads of those who find them spin, but they end up in a museum. And that's a good thing, because such wealth can drive a person crazy. A metal detector and a diving suit helped people discover ancient treasures. What's next? How about a dog? Yes, it could be perhaps a great replacement for a metal detector, by the way. So in 2013, 2 people were walking their dog in Northern California on their property. Suddenly, they discovered a rusty can filled with coins minted from 1847 to 1894. There were about 1,500 coins, and they all were gold. Another chance for a carefree, rich future? Not this time. The find caused a lot of controversy among specialists. There was one version, according to which these coins could have been stolen from the US Mint. But later, the US Mint debunked this suggestion, as they'd never had this gold in their storage. Anyway, it's interesting what the point was in hiding it all in someone else's yard. Some thief risked their freedom and life to get rich. When they succeeded, they just hid the coins as if they never existed. What a strange deal. Coins, jewelry, meteorite items, it's all cool. But let's end our video with something grand and epic. Archaeologists were conducting research near the Mediterranean coast of Egypt and discovered a treasure trove inside a sunken temple and sanctuary. Despite the waves, earthquakes, and seawater, the massive find was preserved in a not bad condition. The temple was built a very long time ago and collapsed in the middle of the 2nd century BCE. It was an important structure in ancient Egypt. People considered this place holy. Pharaohs came to the temple to seek help from the higher powers of Egyptian mythology to obtain titles for their rule. Titles of kings of the universe. For many people, this place was like the center of the universe, and now it lies forgotten on the seabed, almost ruined. Time spares nothing. Researchers found out the temple had been part of an ancient port city. A long time ago, an earthquake occurred in this area and destroyed the city. Tidal waves softened the ground and dragged the town into the Mediterranean Sea. While studying the temple, scientists found many secret treasures there: silver ceremonial instruments, gold jewelry, and alabaster vessels. In past times, people used them to store perfumes or greasy ointments called unguents. Perhaps in ancient Egypt, they weren't bad in the field of cosmetology. Near the temple, archaeologists discovered a Greek sanctuary. Apparently, the Greeks living in Egypt or coming here on business wanted to pay tribute to Aphrodite, so they created a small building in her honor. In that place, archaeologists found bronze and ceramic artifacts from different cultures. Scientists found out that the Greeks had permission to trade in the Egyptian city and even be its residents. It seems pharaohs living around 600 BCE were favorable to the Greeks. The profession of an archaeologist is very exciting. But what would you do if you found some ancient treasure? Before answering this question, find out what law applies to such finds in your country.